As a quick review, in Thursday's Edpuzzle, I presented you with this chart, Multiple Causes, the Fall of the Western Roman Empire. Remember that because empires are large and complex, when historians talk about the fall of an empire, they're typically talking about a long and gradual process, not a single cause or sudden event that completely takes down this massive land empire. For the Roman Empire, we have some major categories: political, social, economic, and military factors, and then specific events or incidences that fall into those categories that gradually weakened the empire's control over its land and its people. For economic factors, so things relating to a system of making and trading things of value within a state, you have poor harvests, so you can't trade any of your grain or olive oil or grapes or wine for other products that you might need outside of your empire. You can't sell them to the people to make money off of that. There's a disruption of trade, particularly if you're dealing with invasions and attackers on trade routes. You are not able to travel to, nearby empires in order to bring your goods to market and make money from selling your goods elsewhere, or being able to bring in things from those other places. There was a gold and silver drain. Remember that particularly in the ancient world, money was actually made of valuable materials. It was actually made of gold and silver. At the time, again, silver as a precious metal and gold as a precious metal had an absolute value. And so if you have less gold in your coins, you have less gold in your pocket, your coins buy you less. Inflation is related to that. Inflation from your Unit 2 vocabulary is when prices skyrocket and the same amount of money no longer buys you the same amount of things. Crushing tax burdens, meaning poor people were being demanded very high taxes that they were unable to pay, and then their farmland was getting taken away when they couldn't pay it, even though it was an unreasonable amount of money for the government to ask for. And again, this widening gap between the rich and poor, increasingly impoverishing the Western Roman Empire, which is what we think of as today as modern Europe. And then we had military factors. And keep in mind, hopefully you're seeing as we're looking at this chart, how each one of these things impacts the other and connects with the other. Civil war and unrest is a political factor, but it comes from or is caused by the social factors of contrast between rich and poor and low confidence in the empire and corruption of leaders. Civil war and unrest is caused by economic factors like the crushing tax burden and the widening gap between the rich and poor, increasing poverty. Military is impacted by social as well. So the military factors are threat from Northern European tribes, so people who are going to try and attack your empire. That is not necessarily caused by these other things. However, the problem of European tribes threatening to attack is made worse by a social factor, a decline in population due to disease or food shortage. You have less men to be able to stave off that attack. It is further complicated by low confidence in the empire and disloyalty and lack of patriotism. People aren't going to want to fight and put their lives on the line to push back the European tribes. And you have weak leadership, so they might not make the best decisions about how to best thwart the invasion. Political, from your Unit 1 vocabulary terms, means anything having to do with the actions of government leaders and includes things like providing defense and distributing resources. Remember that the number one political issue that weakens an empire is weak leadership. An economy, also from our Unit 1 vocabulary, is a system of making and trading things of value. Keep in mind that trading can also mean exchanging money for goods and services. So it can mean exchanging goods for goods or goods for services, and it can also mean our current system of exchanging money for goods or services. Inflation is from your Unit 2 vocabulary, and this is a sharp rise in prices that means the same amount of money no longer gets you the same amount of things. There's a sort of normal inflation that just happens over time. For example, 25 cents used to buy you a movie ticket in 1950. Today, 25 cents will not buy you a movie ticket. Movie tickets more like $12. 1950 to 2021, that's a normal and expected amount of inflation or price increase. And wages, meaning what people are paid, have increased at the same rate. So we can afford to pay $12 for a movie ticket instead of 25 cents. On the other hand, if in January of one year, a movie ticket cost 25 cents, and by December of the same year, it costs $12, it's highly unlikely that people's wages, the amount of money people is making, went up that same amount. Social unrest, of course, is when people in a society become hostile toward authority, to the government leaders, to law enforcement, because they've become frustrated with their leadership, they've lost confidence, and they don't believe that their authority figures have their best interests in mind or are doing their job of protecting the people. If people recognize that they aren't alone in feeling this frustration, they will start to band together, and the authorities will struggle to maintain public safety and order. This can lead, of course, to riots, to destruction of property, to insurrections, acts of violence, and extreme cases, civil war. And remember, one of the biggest problems with civil war is that in addition to you now have your entire society fighting each other, the people on the outside who might want to come and take over notice this as a weak moment, a good time to attack you. Economic troubles we have yet to really talk about. And so economics is all about having control of in-demand resources. If you have control of resources, your state is strong and independent. If you do not have control of resources, your state is weak because it depends on neighbors being willing to trade with you for the things that you need. If you have nothing your neighbor wants, how can you get the resources that you need? You can't. And since your neighbor has all the control, they can also charge whatever price they want, even if it's outrageous. Remember, causing sort of that inflation. If you're not willing to pay the price, someone else will, or they might have something that they can trade with to reduce the price. If your state is in major debt, that means it doesn't have any savings account to draw from. It not only has zero extra funds to pull from in times of need, it has already spent money it doesn't have. It owes money to other people. That means there's no money to help out in an emergency. And there's no money to pay for vital government services like military defense or even public sanitation, trash removal, maintaining the sewer systems. How do you think the people will respond when they're no longer being protected and the garbage is overflowing in the streets? And they're probably not going to sit quietly by and trust that their leaders have it handled. The political issues we just talked about directly impact these environmental issues, and the environmental issues directly impact the issues that leaders in government are going to have to deal with. Environmental issues alone are usually not enough to bring down an empire, but they can make existing problems much, much worse. If a deadly outbreak of disease is killing off a good chunk of the population, who will fight in the military? Who will manufacture new weapons and armor? Who will farm the land and harvest crops to feed everyone? If croplands suffer from infestations of locusts, fungal infections that kill all the plants, or droughts and dust storms, How will people eat? You can't buy food from neighbors if you're already in serious debt from those economic issues. How will the people respond when they're starving to death? Will they sit back and trust that their government is handling the situation? Or will they start to revolt and protest and riot? And then invasion by outsiders is a threat that can also just file under military problems or military issues. This is when strong outside forces, such as nomadic tribes skilled in combat, neighboring empires that have recently grown and expanded their size and power, seize the opportunity to attack you while you're weak and vulnerable. If your military has been weakened by social unrest, soldiers are unwilling to fight, people are fighting among themselves, by economic trouble, cannot afford to pay enough soldiers to defend your extensive borders, or environmental issues, deadly disease has killed a significant percent of the population of fighting age, you will not be able to maintain defenses along your borders. This is a consequence of overexpansion, or adding so much territory to your empire that you're actually unable to defend all of it and maintain order within the empire at the same time. It's simply too large.